Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Susan Axelrod, editor of Culture, and we're pleased to partner with Garda DOC Wines and Piave DOC Cheeses to present a perfect pairing from Europe. These two artisanal products are being showcased together because they reflect the natural environment, traditions, and craftsmanship of one of Italy's most spectacular regions. We have a very special presentation for you today featuring two experts who will discuss the unique characteristics of this dynamic duo. They'll touch on terroir, regional history, high quality standards, and of course, what makes these products perfect enhancements to your restaurants and shops. Our goal today is to introduce you to these products and provide you as much intel as we can to help you sell and merchandise them. Our experts will also offer tips for how to properly describe these products so you can better engage with your customers about them. A couple of housekeeping tips before we get started. As you've likely noticed, this presentation format is a bit different than our prior webinars. Be sure to switch your screen to gallery mode. Feel free to turn your camera on, interact, and ask questions by raising your hand or using the chat feature. Remember to keep yourself muted until we call on you to speak or ask a question. But please don't hesitate. The more questions, the better. Now I'd like to introduce our two industry professionals. But first, a note, Griselda Powell from Murray's was supposed to be with us today to talk about Piave cheeses. And unfortunately, Griselda had a last-minute emergency. So we are very grateful to Lou DiPaolo, the third generation of family-owned DiPaolo in Little Italy, who has stepped in at the last minute to talk to us about Piave DOP cheese. And Lou knows probably more than anybody about these cheeses. Presenting Garda DOC Wines, we have Carrie Lynn Strong, our expert wine consultant with an excellent knowledge of Italian wine. We hope you enjoy learning more about this perfect pairing from Europe. Take it away, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm extremely excited to be able to talk to you all about Garda DOC. We have a slide presentation, if we could pop that up. Thank you so much. There we are. So named as part of the top 10 wine regions by Wine Enthusiast in 2019. Garda DOC is one of the northernmost Mediterranean climates in Italy, with vineyards lining the rolling hills. This charming, sun-drenched, majestic region provides a unique environment for grapes to express their aromatic components, complexity, acidity, and balance. The Garda DOC is located in Lake Garda, which is the largest lake in all of Italy, home to picturesque historic castles and quaint villages with rustic Mediterranean style homes and businesses. Garda DOC is also surrounded by the medieval towns of Soave and Verona. Situated halfway between Brescia and Verona, the winemaking dates to at least the 1st century. So over 100 years ago, winemaking, I'm sorry, the 1st century, over 1,000 years ago, sorry about that. Lake Garda mirrors the history of the culture with modern transformation of fine quality raw materials. Next slide, please. Lake Garda offers the perfect wine growing conditions, with lake breezes lifting a cool fog that descends on the vineyards, allowing for aeration amongst the vines, protecting the vines themselves from varying mildews. The combination of these balmy breezes and sunlight allows for perfect grape growing conditions. It's an ideal climate as well for olive trees, lemons, and capers, providing a depth of culinary culture within the history of the region. Next slide. A young umbrella region, Garda DOC was recognized in 1996, so not too long ago. There are over 10,000 growers in the area, over 400 wineries, with 31,000 hectares of vine. That's divided by about almost 28,000 hectares in the province of Verona and about 3,200 divided between the two provinces of Mantua and Brescia. The principal grape varieties for whites are Chardonnay, Cortese, Garganega, Pinot Bianco, Pinot Grigio, Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, Trebbiano, and Welsh Riesling. For reds, you have Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Carmenere, Corvina, Marzemino, Merlot, and Pinot Nero. 3 cities, as I mentioned, Verona has 6 DOCs, Brescia has 3, and Mantua has 1. These 3 cities are close in proximity, each of them stunningly beautiful, and all 3 of them on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Next slide. Garda DOC aims to underline the value of varietal wines of the 10 historic designations of Garda area between Lombardy and the Veneto regions. Because we are pairing with Piave Cheese today, we're going to be focusing on the Spumante, Pinot Grigio, and Chardonnay. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So for you today, we have the Garda Spumante. So blends for Spumante must reach a minimum of 50% of a single varietal, either Chardonnay, Garganega, Pinot Grigio, or Trebbiano. In some cases, a Spumante might be labeled by the varietal, and in that case, it must be 85% of that varietal on the label. They also do make a Rosato or Rosé Spumante, and that must contain at least 50% of one of the red varietals. With Spumante, you have 2 different methods in which the secondary fermentation can be created. You can either utilize sparkling or traditional methods by which the secondary fermentation occurs in the bottle, and turning of the bottles at different intervals helps the wine naturally ferment. It's also possible to utilize the Charmat method, which entails that the secondary fermentation is done in steel tank. So I know you all don't have these wines in front of you. If you have a wine in front of you, I encourage you to enjoy it and taste along with me. I have one of the Spumantes from Garda DOC. You have these beautiful, fine, persistent bubbles you can see in the glass. The color is more or less intense lemon, lighter yellows. The bouquet is absolutely beautiful. You get these gorgeous white flower aromatics. This is going to be a drier style. And there are some savory qualities, definite minerality coming from the terroir. And those delicate floral characteristics transfer to the flavor profile on the wine. And you almost get a bit of pear or apple skin tones on the wine itself, which to me balances out that wine, giving you not only acidity where your mouth is watering, but also a bit of tannin. Just a touch of drying on the palate, just a touch. Again, of note, total minimum alcohol volume is 12%. And in this case, the minimum volume, the minimum total acidity can only be 5 grams per liter. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for monovarietals like this one, the still wine must have 85% of said variety in order to be labeled as such. So for this one we have here is a Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio is known as a mutant clone of Pinot Nero. Pinot, meaning pine cone, reflects the shape of the bunches on the vine of any of the grapes that are called Pinot. So Pinot Grigio, Pinot Nero, Pinot Blanc. Grown all around the world, Pinot Grigio is also known as Pinot Gris, as well as Grauburgunder. In Italy, the styles are more refreshing. It highlights the acidity and minimizes the overripe fruit qualities that you can find in some regions around the world. And you're looking for more of a neutral flavor. So you do have more of an aperitif style wine. It's lighter in body, lighter in color. And the notes tend to be more on the citrus side.
Carrie, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Of course you can.
Tiffany had a comment, which is I want to share with everybody. She said, "This is great. I love how it was started with maps." Thank you, Tiffany. And also, I'm curious, you are drinking some wine there. Can you share with us what you're drinking?
Yes, so this is a Garda DOC Pinot Grigio.
No, I'm asking Tiffany what she's drinking. I'm sorry.
Truth be told, she messaged me earlier and I think she has a Prosecco.
Okay, all right, that's fine. She is enjoying a wine, which is great. Okay, go
So
on.
she's
Carrie.
trying sparkling, which I definitely recommend with cheese always.
Excellent.
Thank you, Tiffany. Yes, so let's move on to the Chardonnay. So I also have this Chardonnay as well. This is also Garda DOC Chardonnay. Again, the minimum for labeling in Garda DOC is 85%. So there can be other varietals in the quote blend, but only up to 15%. So Chardonnay, originally from Burgundy, is also grown all over the world, wherever wine is produced. It's a neutral style with associations of flavor coming from either oak or the terroir. Chardonnay is also very popular in sparkling production. You can get anywhere from green apple, pear, citrus, melons to tropical fruit, depending on where in fact it is grown in the world. You can get, with secondary malolactic fermentation, you can get more creamy notes, or if you're aging in oak, you can get more of those vanilla and hazelnut tones. This particular Garda DOC Chardonnay, you have more of those fresh fruit tones, more minerality. It's really about this place, this beautiful, majestic, historic region that has almost the perfect growing conditions with the sunlight and the light breezes off of the water. And again, one thing that I always think about is climate mitigation. So if you think about the Finger Lakes are very narrow, but they're super, super deep. So Lake Garda, being the largest lake in Italy, is going to be a climate mitigator. So in the winter, the vines don't get too cold, but also in the summer, they don't get too hot. As I said, it really is almost the perfect growing conditions. Go ahead to the next slide, because I want to talk a bit about food pairings and suggestions. Yes, it pairs all of these three wines pair well with Piave, but we know that it's not just limited to one particular cheese, but some ideas that you can speak with your guests about. This beautiful, light, citrusy spumante pairs well with stone fruits like peaches or nectarines, as well as salty and leafy vegetables. So think almost purslane or spinach, or I made a, just kind of like a light cream spinach with just a touch of cream and a little bit of grated Piave. It also pairs well with pizza and shellfish and is an absolutely fabulous aperitif, as I mentioned earlier. The Chardonnay pairs very nicely with freshwater and saltwater seafoods, shellfish, risotto, spaghetti, pastas, think with clam sauce or even sushi or sashimi. These wines go so well with different cuisines from all over the world. The Pinot Grigio is also a fantastic aperitif and also can be paired with a variety of fresh and saltwater dishes, seafood dishes, and are also a great match for vegetarian fare. So all sorts of different composed salads, crudité, or even warm or baked or sauteed vegetable dishes. Absolutely fantastic. Or even Indian curries would go absolutely fantastic. Go ahead for the next slide. So I know one of the things that we want to encourage you all to do is think about merchandising ideas. You can take advantage of different seasons and different holidays. So I know we just finished up with a big round of holidays, but don't forget, because I come from the restaurant business, we're always thinking about the next holiday. You have Valentine's Day coming up. Heck, you could support St. Patty's Day with Pinot Grigio. Always be thinking about the next way to sell. So sparkling wine can be a great base for cocktails. Think Bellinis or mimosas during brunch. Summer can also be a very wonderful time to enjoy a very clean, crisp, fresh Pinot Grigio, or this light and beautiful Spumante, or even this dry, vibrant and vivacious Chardonnay coming from Garda DOC. Other things that you can do are think creatively about displaying the wines. Photographs of the region give an amazing sense of place. We had a photograph in the beginning, but I do want to let you know, I tried to give you a bit of a water scene in the background here so that maybe you could imagine yourself in the cold winter time actually being in the warmth of the sun with these beautiful cool airs coming off of the water. At tastings, make sure that you're telling your guests and your customers what notes that they should be tasting as they sip. So as I was mentioning before, stone fruits or citrus tones or mineral tones, say those words will put the idea into your customers' heads. It's almost like a challenge I remember having one time in high school. Like it was try not to think about a big white polar bear. See how that easy that is? Now you're thinking about a big white polar bear. That's as easy it is to tell your guests what to think about when they're enjoying or they're tasting these wines. Stone fruits, lemons, limes, citrus, nectarines are different than peaches, are different than white peaches, are different than apricots, are different than Bosc pears versus Anjou pears. All of these are beautiful words. Great acidity. I know people fear acidity, but if you think your guests are going to fear the word acidity, which I think is coming into in vogue right now, you know, you can say things like fresh or refreshing or citrus or sea breeze almost, just to be reminiscent of the region itself. And when you're having these tastings, you can provide little bites to eat, you know, like almonds or crackers with honey that give them an idea of how well these wines go and pair with food. Bring in some Piave too. You get that beautiful salty characteristic from this cheese. And again, if you have some, definitely eat some. Taste it with all of these wines, or even just the wine that you have. You get these beautiful crystalline tones to the wines. The wines bring out the saltiness, the creaminess, this beautifulness, and this beautiful cheese.
Carrie, I have a comment from Lisa Saunders. She says Chinese New Year is coming up too. These wines would pair well with Asian cuisines, and I agree, absolutely. They're perfect for Asian food.
If you think about the way that cheese works, and especially Piave has that salinity characteristic to it, think about soy with any Asian dish. Think about a little bit of spice, any Asian dish, that umami flavor, absolutely perfect.
Great.
Garda DOC is one of the most specialized in Italy, where oenological innovation meets great wine traditions. It brings sincere wines to a great expression and terroir to tables all over the world and makes for absolutely fantastic food pairings. If you go to the next slide, and Susan, if you could, for more information and to download the retailer's guide, if you put the culturecheesemag.com/Garda Piave into the chat, you can go directly to it on your computer.
Yep. Thank you, Carrie. That was really, really great.
Thanks, Susan.
And now we're going to turn it over to Lou DiPaolo, who is standing by. Right, Lou? I think I see you there in your wine bar. Hello. You're a little mute. You're muted, I think, Lou. So we got to turn your microphone on. Okay. So from what I understand, DiPaolo celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2019, right, Lou? I think you're still muted, Lou. Can you get somebody to turn that phone on? Oh. Okay. Okay. Okay, I think he's figuring it out. Again, we're very grateful to Lou for stepping in today when Griselda Powell had a last minute emergency. So we're just trying to get him on audio here so we can hear him. In the meantime,
Susan, if anyone has any questions,
yes, I was just about to say
not just the
that.
webinar, go ahead.
Any questions for Carrie while we're waiting for Lou?
Who's drinking what?
Yeah. Oh, from Lisa's Daily Cheese Plate. One of my favorite ways to pair Piave is to shave thin slices of it into a Belgian endive leaf with a drizzle of homemade balsamic vinegar. Wow. I can see now how a Pinot Grigio would pair wonderfully with this appetizer. That sounds great. Oh, how big is Lake Garda? Tiffany wants to know.
Oh, Tiffany,
It's very big, Tiffany. It's the biggest lake in Italy. I'll look it up for you. Lou, are you there?
I don't know. Am I unmuted now?
You're unmuted. Okay.
All right, you hear me. Okay, great.
I can hear you. Take it away. Let's hear all about Piave Cheese.
Well,
from
first
the
of all, that was a
master.
great presentation. I enjoyed that very much, and I learned a lot from the Garda wines as well, even though we sell them here, both in our wine bar and our wine store. But talk about the lake area, the beautiful, pristine Lake Lago di Garda, one of my favorite parts of Italy. I'm going to switch to another part within the same region of Italy, the Veneto, but all the way up in the mountains, way up in the area of Belluno, the province of Belluno, where the Piave cheese comes from. And Piave, one of my favorite cheeses, is one of the most consistent of all cheeses that we have coming from Italy. What makes that cheese so very special, aside from the fact that they have some great cheesemakers involved there, is the area. The area is very rich, lush grazing grounds for mountain cows such as the Bruno Alpina and the Grigio Alpina. And these cows are free grazing. So often throughout the areas, not only in Italy, but other parts of the world, cows live in the barn and the feed is usually brought to them. These cows are free. They live and graze on the mountain slopes, and they're feeding on, especially during the summer period, freshly grazed grass, herbs, flowers. This all makes a difference in the product that we're going to experience with Piave cheese. Where does it come from, the name Piave? Well, there is a river that runs from the Dolomite Mountains down to Italy. It's called the Piave River. And at the base of this river is where this cheese was born, probably around 40 or 50 years ago. But the cheese has an ancient tradition. The tradition goes back hundreds of years in the production. And they created this particular cheese, Piave. It's in the form of what we call in the family of lattaria, a cheese that's made in a certain shape, size, and always with cow's milk. Piave is made with whole milk and comes in readily available in 3 ages. However, there is 5 particular ages of Piave, from Fresco to a Reserva Stravecchio. But in the United States, the most common 3 versions that we get here is called Menzano, simply meaning medium aged, Vecchio, old, and then a Stravecchio. And I have a couple of examples right over here. Let's see if we could show you the cheese itself. The blue will either be a Menzano, written Menzano, or a Vecchio, written Vecchio. And the red would be what they call a Stravecchio. I don't know if you see all the cheeses here on display right here. What's the difference? In the aging of the cheese, you're going to get a very sense of different characteristic. For instance, a Menzano, aged probably around between 3, 4, maybe 5 months age, is usually a little bit creamy. It's a cheese that suits well. Sometimes people like to melt or stuff things such as artichokes with it and shavings of it. And this particular one is very, very delicate. So I would pair it really with a delicate white wine, possibly with the Pinot Grigio would go really well with that. The Vecchio, the blue Vecchio, which is usually aged anywhere from 8 months to 12 months, tends to have a little bit more structure, texture, and more characteristic in aroma and flavor. And this particular one, fantastic with a light-bodied red wine. And if you want, you can have it also served usually with a little bit of perhaps cured meats, such as your prosciutto or bresaola, air-dried beef, goes really well with that. And finally, the Vecchio. The Vecchio is one that I prefer as my favorite. As this cheese ages, 12 months to 18 months, the Vecchio tends to develop a lot of what we call tyrosine. And people ask, what is that little crystals that you get in cheese, that salty crystals? Well, it's actually not salt. What it is, it's a breakdown of fat and protein, little bits of amino acids being separated and forming bits of protein. We call it tyrosine. Tyrosine coming from the Greek word tyros, which means cheese. That one is excellent. That particular cheese is excellent, grated, shaved on salads. My favorite is just having it with the sparkling wine. So talking about Piave cheese, the greatness of the cheese is the milk and the master cheesemakers that go back hundreds of years of tradition in the area of the northeastern part of Italy, the Dolomite Mountains. Anybody who's ever been up in that area can say that those mountains lend itself to not only the beauty and the serenity of the area, but the history behind it. And people say to themselves, what makes those Dolomites so unique? Well, they're ancient reefs, actually, going back millions of years, being pushed up when Africa and Europe collided. These reefs now became these beautiful mountains that change color all year. And these cows graze along the mountain slopes of the Dolomite Mountains, giving Piave this very, very special characteristic and flavor. So having Piave with some of the wines from the lake area is fantastic. Having Piave as itself, maybe the aged one with a little bit of honey as well on top of it, goes really well. I would suggest that as well. So it's truly one of the great cheeses of Italy that has what I call a new cheese with an old history going back. It's also what we would call a DOP cheese, like in wine, DOC. Well, we have certain products in Italy that we call our DOP, or in English we say PDO, Protected Designation of Origin. Piave cheese is a protected cheese produced in a certain tradition and is now classified as a cheese from the specific area made in a specific way, carries that DOP certification, which, if you could see here, a little round seal in that particular cheese. So it's one of the great cheeses of Italy, and we recommend it always. It's always in our wine bar, served with all our guests that come in. And it's one of the most popular cheeses that we sell at DiPaolo's in our cheese store. All right, so that's the story of Piave. Okay, if there's any questions, gladly answer them.
Thank you so much, Lou. And one thing we want to do now is to encourage everyone who's participating to suggest ways that you would pair Garda DOC wines and Piave DOP cheeses. So let's hear some ideas as well as some questions for Lou and or for Carrie.
Well, I have a bit of a question before we go into it, because when I began my restaurant career in New York City, I worked as a manager for artisanal restaurants. And we used this cheese, and I used to teach this cheese, but I would teach it with Sauvignon Blanc. But these wines from Garda are absolutely beautiful. But one of the things that I always found was really interesting, and I want to see if Lou can comment on it, is that all those beautiful creamy notes, that salinity notes that you get from Piave cheese, one characteristic that I always found was really important to note from Piave is that it gets this pineapple flavor profile. So Lou, can you weigh in on the pineapple flavor profile?
You know, it's funny to say pineapple. I always find Piave, for me, and everybody's tastes are a little bit different. I always classify it as a cheese that brings out flavors of hazelnuts to me, especially the aged one. But I can understand what you're saying with pineapple because it leaves a very sweetness, and especially in the Vecchio, not the Stravecchio, but the Vecchio leaves a sweetness, saltiness, but then it becomes sweet at the end. And I could understand where you're getting that pineapple notes from that. But for me, especially when we get to the Stravecchio, the red Piave, I sort of taste hazelnuts. And, you know, for everyone's gusto is different to some degree. And I could appreciate how you're finding pineapple in that cheese.
And then the second part of that question is I was looking for Piave, and one of the things that I was a bit, I don't know, disappointed, and maybe everybody here that's listening to us today can help out with this, but I could only find in a variety of different cheese stores that have, I mean, it's not New York cheese stores, let's be honest, I'm in Pennsylvania, but I could only find the Vecchio.
Vecchio blue or the Vecchio red?
The red.
The Vecchio red. Well, again, you know, probably the Vecchio red is the one that is most durable. In other words, for a small cheese shop that maybe doesn't sell it as frequently as possible, it holds up the longest. The younger the cheese, the more fat is remaining. It can mold faster. So maybe a lot of the producers or shop owners chose to use just the aged one because it lasts a little bit longer in their case. But in reality, all three Piaves should be available in a really fine cheese shop because customers have different tastes. Some look for younger cheese, some look for more aged cheese. And certainly in our place, Paolo's, we actually have 4 different Piaves, one of which is really not available. It's the Reserva, which is 18 to 24 months. And so we give people the opportunity to choose the age that they want. But outside of New York, more than likely, I found traveling around, speaking on behalf of a lot of other products, when I visited other shops, more was the blue Vecchio was the most readily available, rather than even the red. I've found that. But however, maybe in Pennsylvania, the red seems to be the most sought after, the most available. Certainly the most. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Lou. I have a pairing suggestion for mini cheese plate from Meredith. She says, I would do fresh pears, Piave, and a balsamic drizzle with spumante or Pinot Grigio. That sounds really lovely. And we do have a question from Maria. Is that how I should pronounce your name? And echoed by Carrie about the difference between Piave and other cheeses of its type. And really that comes down to terroir and cheesemakers, right, Lou?
Yes, but also, for instance, as I mentioned before, Piave, I classify Piave in the family of what we call lattaria. And lattaria is a cheese that's usually made in the Veneto area, in the northeastern part of the Veneto, and in Friuli, Venezia Giulia. Cheeses such as Montasio, Spilimbergo, Fagagna, and of course, Piave. What's the difference? In some cases, they'll use partially skimmed milk in making these cheeses. So Piave being very rich, mountain, as you've mentioned, the terroir, of course, is very important. The type of cow that's grazing, whether it's a brown mountain cow, or if it's a what we call the Frisone or the black and white Holstein cow, will give you constantly a different characteristic in the cheese itself. Cheesemaker, of course, makes a difference. But the type of, again, the sourcing of the milk, from what type of cow, and from what area the cow is grazing on, certainly makes the difference, as well as what percentage of whole and skimmed milk is used. So it could be a combination of whole milk and skimmed milk, not skim milk, but skimmed milk, where they'll take the first layer of fat off the milk and possibly blend it with whole milk, or just straight whole milk will give a difference in the characteristic of the cheese.
Great.
Okay.
Yes, and we have a question from Tiffany, and I think you may have touched on this, but if you could tell us again the difference between the red and the blue label, Lou.
Okay, the blue label comes in 3 different ages. It comes fresco, which is really not available too much in the United States. You have to really request it. Fresco being a cheese that's aged between 30 and 60 days. It's very soft, very mild, so often used as a melting cheese, sometimes making what we call in this area a fuso, like a fondue. Then you have also blue Menzano, and it's written on each one of these cheeses, it's written Menzano, Fresco. Menzano aged anywhere from, say, 3 to 6 months, tends to have a little bit more density, still fairly creamy. The third blue is Vecchio. Vecchio is a minimum of 8 months, between 8 and 12 months. Now you're starting to develop a lot of character in the flavor. Those are 3 different Piaves with the same blue label. However, written on the cheese itself in a small print, and right in the center would be Menzano, Fresco, or Vecchio. The red, on the other hand, is what we call a special aging of minimum of 12 months to 18 months. This particular cheese is now, when I like to say that Piave is fully mature, where you start to get a little bit of the crystals, and you start to get a more complex, more intense flavor and aroma. And certainly that is my favorite of all of them. The Reserva, as I mentioned before, very limited in the United States, is 18 months or better, 18 to 24 months, is very good for grating. It's a cheese that you might want to substitute your Parmigiano or Grana Padano in your pasta dishes, or on top of vegetables, or in a salad as well, shaved in a salad. So those are basically the differences what you'll find in the Piave. The blue color, you have to look a little closer to see what particular age it is by Fresco, Menzano, or Vecchio. The red is Vecchio, and a blackish red is what we call the Reserva. Again, not really readily available in the United States. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Lou. That's great. And we do have a comment from Carrie as well as a question. Did you see that question? I'll read it in case.
I like this question very much. So for those who aren't looking in the chat, the comment is balsamic is such a great pairing with the cheese, and I totally agree. But it can be a wild card when introducing wine to the bite. How do you see balsamic fitting in with the wine? And I totally agree with you. You know, it's interesting. I worked at Casa Lever for 3 years on Park Avenue in Manhattan before the pandemic. And I can't believe that it's already 2 years since I haven't been there. But, you know, we did probably the most amazing caprese salad that I have ever had in my entire life. And they never put balsamic on it. And that's a tradition that does happen here in America, particularly in American Italian restaurants. And that's to just show that there's a difference, because Casa Lever is an Italian restaurant where you're not going to find, you know, meatballs and pizza and lasagna. You know, it's going to be melanzane and true caprese, mozzarella from buffaloes, and from Italy itself. But they don't use as much balsamic in you know, as an accoutrement as much as we do here in America. And I think a lot of that has to do with wine, because if you do have an aged balsamic, it does all of these three wines that I have in front of me that I've been talking about this whole, you know, past 40 minutes, they would absolutely be overpowered by it. But that said, balsamic, especially aged balsamic, really does balance out the cheese. So, you know, it's an interesting bite. And Lou kind of mentioned that you could use a lighter style red with some of these cheeses too. And I absolutely agree with that as well. And that brings me into the comment that, you know, some people think cheese boards, oh, red wine, you know, and the reality of the situation is that white wines actually go better with cheeses than red wines because they tend to overpower. Now, an aged Piave might be able to handle a bigger red wine. And I think that perhaps the Piave would be able to handle a more aged balsamic. And if you had a red wine, that might, you know, marry much better in terms of that pairing. But yeah, if you're going to do one of the younger Piaves, I might stay away from an aged balsamic and maybe even go with a honey, as I mentioned before, something a little bit lighter. And you know, think about the different meats that Lou was talking about a bit earlier. They might be able to handle some more of those wines, and even balsamic as an accoutrement. But I don't know. For me, I think that balsamic does overpower a white wine for sure. And I like using aged balsamic, onions or mushrooms. So that's just me.
Thank you, Carrie. That's great. I had a question for you, both of you, maybe, but maybe a little bit more for Lou. What about cooking with these cheeses? I'm a big cook and I always think of how can I use a cheese? I love it on a cheese board, but how could I use it in the kitchen? Any thoughts about that?
Certainly the cheese that the different ages of cheese lends itself to preparations of food. As I mentioned before, the Pano, the cheese about 3 to 6 months, is a fantastic cheese. Say if you want to do a shavings of it over, say, potato and put into the oven. Give a slightly melting, slightly brown crusting topping of over the potato. It's also fantastic in omelet. Shave it and then make an omelet with it. Okay, you won't have as much elasticity as you find with a soft cheese such as Samorza or mozzarella, but you'll have a definite texture and character in taking the vecchio. The vecchio is a fantastic cheese. If you want to bake something, for instance, say you wanted to do
Lou, can you put can you be a little more closer to the microphone? You're kind of fading.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
So start that over again,
Okay,
baking something.
Okay, if you wanted to bake something such as making a simple lasagna, and you wanted to add an additional cheese in the mixture, I would use the vecchio, the blue vecchio in that. Do shavings of the blue vecchio. The blue vecchio is going to give you a little bit more character and flavor than the manzano, but yet it's still going to give you a slightly more softer texture when it's baked. And naturally, when I want to use a grated cheese, I would definitely take the the Stravecchio and grate that cheese over pastas and salads, and sometimes I'll even cover it over some cheese. I'm sorry, some like shaves of slightly, very thinly sliced bresaola, rather than I'll do the aged vecchio shaved right on top of bresaola. It's absolutely fantastic with a little bit of olive oil from the Garda area, which is a light, more delicate olive oil. So then pair it with your sparkling wine from the Garda area. It's a fantastic salad. So each age will lend itself to different dishes. You have to be a little bit of improvising and figure out how strong you want the cheese
in flavor in that particular dish.
Right.
I would even say if you have a steak carpaccio, you could not do a shave. Lou, I'm gonna embarrass you by saying I can't remember. I'm gonna embarrass all of you by saying I can't remember what it's called. It's not shaving it per se, but it's kind of like pulling the ribbons off of it onto a steak carpaccio. I think would absolutely be beautiful as well. And as I mentioned before, I have even put some of the grated Piave into cooking with vegetables, quick saute or something of that nature. I think is really nice, and it adds a salty component to the vegetables without actually adding salt.
Great. Thank you. Any more questions? Somebody commented using a girole. I don't know if you would do that with this cheese. I'm not sure. I think it would be a little too flaky, perhaps. Right, Lou?
I think so. It might, maybe the fresco, if it's available, might be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, Susan, I think it's important to note that, Lou had mentioned earlier that everyone has different tastes and different flavor desires and likes and dislikes. And so, I encourage everybody to taste, to try, to experiment, both the wines, all the cheese, different things, go ahead, try it with different cuisines, try it with, as I mentioned before, curries, as we talked about, Asian cuisine, whether it be from, Vietnamese food or Chinese food or, Japanese food. It really, the sky's the limit here. And I think that what we're seeing in restaurant culture, and I think I can certainly encourage you to do in the retail sector as well, is just try everything, try something different that you never would think, try something unexpected that, that's just putting amazing ingredients, well-made, fine, high quality ingredients, put them together and see if it works. And if it works, fantastic. Tell the world about it. If it doesn't, so what? Try something else. But that's, I think it's important to know that these are both the Garda DOC wines as well as the Piave cheeses are just such amazing and unique and beautiful and high quality ingredients and products and regions that the sky's the limit with what you can do with them.
Well, Kathleen Riegler agrees. She says, very favorite cheese, works with everything.
Fantastic.
Yay, Kathleen, thank you. So Lou, I know you've been there to the Veneto and to the Belluno region. And what about you, Carrie? Have you traveled to that part of the world? Has anybody else traveled to that part of the world?
I have been to Venice, and so admittedly, I traveled to Europe. I lived in Dijon, and I traveled to Italy before I became a sommelier and before I ever knew that I would become a sommelier. And I drank a lot of wine and I ate a lot of cheese, and years went by before I realized that I actually had to try and remember the things that I learned when I was there.
Yes. Yep. I was in the Dolomites in college, and God knows what I was eating and drinking. So we won't count that.
Everything.
Yes, it was all very good. Carrie Jarrett has been there. Caitlin Kelly says it's on her bucket list. Absolutely. So
Can I
tell us.
Mount? Hey, people often ask me, I've been traveling back and forth over 100 trips to Italy, maybe close to 150. And in all of the 20 regions, and people ask me, what's my favorite part of Italy? And I often give them this answer. And I come from the south. My home is in the center. My heart is in the mountains. So what it tells you is that all of Italy is very important, very special. But there's something about being in the mountains, freedom and the spirit of just the air and everything about that area is so intoxicating. It's so well. It's a place where, on your bucket list for sure, you must go there. absolutely one of the most parts of Italy. And I don't say that lightly. As someone who's traveled all regions and spent a lot of time. Park is beautiful, but something about those mountains. And the cheese proves the point. In my book, I put a special chapter just on mountain cheese because it's unique to the rest of Italy. That's because of the, as mentioned before, I say you say terroir, but it's certainly that area of the air and the people's lifestyle. Okay, so that's just a great part of it.
Yes. So Laura Pauli says, hi Lou, the first time I had Piave, Lila Kelly sent me your Vecchio. It was phenomenal. She says hello.
It was a friend and customer from Florida. I know her for years. A mother, great lady. Oh, I remember her fondly.
Great. Thanks, Laura.
I want to echo Lou's sentiments. Having worked in an Italian restaurant, as I mentioned, for so long, and working with Italians, like real true Italians. Yeah, the products that come from Italy, they have such a passion about they're the real deal. They put a lot of time and effort and generations, and whether it be the wine, whether it be the cheese, whether it be the meats, you know, it's the cuisines, the pasta, the everything, you know, it's just the most pure enjoyment that you possibly can find. And before I finish my sentiment, I also want to doubly thank Lou for joining us today, because half an hour before the presentation, we weren't really sure what we were going to do. And you've been a tremendous asset to giving everybody here a tremendous amount of information. And hey, I didn't even know you wrote a book. So tell us what your book is.
Book is it's Paolo's Guide to the Foods of Italy. It's it has a subtitle, 100 Years of Wisdom and Stories from Behind. It's truly 100 years of tradition. It's based on some of the foods of Italy. There's much more. Everything I left, by the way, but it's done through stories. Literally showing you how food together through the information. It's a great put out by Rand, and it's available on Amazon as well. But it's really a great read, and I'm really proud of it. The second book, COVID's got it stalled a little bit, but
Well, Lou, thank you. Thank you. You are fading in a little bit in and out. So we could get you to put your microphone a little closer for any more comments. Anybody have some more questions for Lou and for Carrie? Well, you all know that we have this fabulous guide that you can download. We had it in the chat earlier, so you can probably find it there. You can also reach out to us. We can perhaps copy and paste it into the guide, into the chat again. Let me just see if we can get it. We really want to thank everyone for being with us today. It's always a pleasure to get together with you, even though we have to do it virtually and we can't do it in person. But we are happy to see so many familiar faces and also some new folks. And we really hope that you enjoyed the presentation. I know I did. We got so much out of everything that you presented today, Carrie and Lou. And both of you are just fabulous. And especially we want to thank Lou for jumping into the mix at the very last minute on a Monday afternoon and giving us so much great information about Garda DOC wines and Piave DOP cheese. Sorry. Thank you.
oh, it's the same. It's the same. PDO and DOP is the same.
Yep. Good. Well, thank you. There's going to be a survey at the end of this presentation. And we would love if you would just take a couple of minutes to answer the questions. It really will just take, less than 2 minutes, actually. So once we end, if you could just stay on and do that. we'd be grateful to get your responses to the presentation today. On behalf of all of my colleagues, I really want to thank you again for being with us. And boy, we hope we see you soon. And if any of you are going to be at the Fancy Food Show, Culture will be there, and the team will be there, and we look forward to meeting you and hope to say hello in person then. So thank you again. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I will say goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.